So if I do like that, you should now be seeing my presentation. And now I'm just gonna see here if I can quickly on the side open up the chat. There we go. All right. Could one of you write in the chat or confirm that you see the presentation, and then we go. That's a confirmation. Thank you. Perfect. All right. So true cybersecurity, the real threats and what actually helps. It's a bold statement, if you will, but I believe I can. I think it will make sense to you why I can say that in such a bold way in just a minute. When you come home or when you walk along the street or something and you see this, I believe probably every single one of you knows what you should be doing at this point in time. Some of you might say, yeah, you'll go and stop this person because it's your home and you have some understanding of what you're allowed to do or not do. But generally speaking, we all know that it's the police we call, right? We see a crime, we call the police. Most people know that. Nearly everyone knows this, right? And some of you might know a little bit extra what you can do as a civil person or not, right? Same way here. If we come home or we see this, something burning, fire, hint in the down left corner, right? We all kind of know what we should be doing. Some of us knows as well that we shouldn't run in there and open all the windows, for example. Some of us knows a little bit more, a little bit deeper, but pretty much every one of us knows that we call these guys because they are the ones that handle this. They are the ones, this is the appropriate way to handle this situation. If this happens, same thing, right? We know this is the place you call if things are really bad. If things are lighter, easier, some of you might know what to do. Same here, right? We have different depths of knowledge in these kind of things, but we know that these are like the end goal. These are the people we refer to. And I'm willing to bet if I show you this, probably, although unlikely to happen, I believe, probably most of you know who to call in a situation like this as well. Something like that, right? However, here's the big question. For those of you who were in Sweden or are in Sweden, or perhaps more as well if you are living abroad, you heard or were somehow affected or known about this situation that happened a while back when the biggest supermarket store in Sweden were shut down because what they describe an IT disturbance, some IT issue, right? What do? You can't go to this store. Maybe you have an alternative store to go through and it's not the end of the world, but maybe you don't. But what do you do in a situation like this? Do you call the police? Maybe. Will that help you? Do you call the fireman, ambulance? Is there some kind of entity that you call that will help solve this societal crisis kind of situation because you can't get food on the table? And the short answer is no, not really. And that sort of puts a picture on the whole cybersecurity world in a sense. It is not entirely established field with very clear guidelines on exactly what's okay or not. There's tons of rules and regulations out there that say do this, do that, and it's changing constantly. But ask yourself, for example, if country A attacks country B with a cyber attack that shuts down a government, is that an act of war or not an act of war? You know, what's okay, what's not okay, versus if you send one single person into that country and into that building, then we're talking espionage, and then it's a very big thing. Versus, but the cyberspace, it's a bit of the Wild West. No one is really sure what is really okay and what's not okay, and there's tons of things happening, and a lot of people have different opinions and thoughts what okay or what's not. So it puts a shadow, if you will, of the entire field where everyone is fighting for their understanding and for their products and their solutions to be the right thing in the market. But in reality, everyone is trying to kind of find their position because it's not entirely established, and far from everyone agrees on what's good and what's right. What Coop did when this happened was they called us at Truesec, and my job was to lead the investigation and understand and identify everything that has happened, what has gone wrong, and what can we do to get all the Coop supermarket stores to open up as fast and efficiently as possible in a secure manner. I am one of the digital forensic investigators at Truesec. Last year, we did just shy over 200 active real cases, around 50% of which were ransomware. So say 100 or so, or a bit below 100 or so ransomware cases last year alone. And I have a senior role in these investigations. And this presentation is based on that. It is not based on frameworks and laws and regulations. It's based on what do we see year after year after year, because I've been doing this for quite a while now, that is actually happening to businesses, big and small, to individual people, what actually does make a difference, what actually works. What are the good measures? What are the things that threat actors care about and not care about or bypass without a second thought? And what is it that is actually important to protect yourself and your company? So that's what this session or this presentation is based on. It's real life data, not only Sweden, a large amount is from Sweden, but over the years we collaborate and work with almost any country there is in everywhere around Europe, but Asia, also Asia, some Africa, and North America, and so forth, South America as well. So we've been a bit everywhere and collaborated with all kinds of entities, Europol, FBI, Swedish police, all kinds of authorities, you name it. So that's where this information comes from. To put a picture a little bit, what is this? What's an investigator, a forensic investigator, and a digital forensic investigator? What is that? I'll just briefly let you know so you have a background understanding. I like to describe it this way. This is a picture you might recognize. It's from a movie series, but I think most of you have seen some kind of a movie, some kind of a series, or something along the lines of one episode or one movie where solving a crime kind of a situation. And then usually what you have is on the left side, you have some type of forensic expert. They will go around with UV lamps, they'll take pictures, they will test blood samples, do lab stuff, and kind of put together the technical details that they can then present to some sort of a detective or an investigator that will kind of put everything together and make a conclusion out of it, try to find the bad guy, usually in these type of situations. That's supposed to be the right guy. The ones that does the interviews and puzzles everything together, maybe with the help of the left one as well, but you get the picture, right? In the digital space, especially in the private sector, and the role that I have and many others is basically a combination of these two, but in cyberspace. So it's collecting data, analyzing data, and putting it all together to make a complete picture of everything that has happened. The main difference is that, of course, it's in the cyber world more so than the physical, even if they are closely aligned these days. And in a police investigation, generally the goal is to find the bad guy. That's like the end goal of things. That is a luxury in the cyber world. It does happen. We have had some arrests, and there are arrests happening around the world, but it's very uncommon. And the end goal is more so get the business or organization back operational, functional, running in an as secure state as possible, as fast as possible. So that puts a little bit of the picture. So with that said, that's one way of viewing the cyberspace, and that's kind of the perspective I come from. So that's what will outline this presentation. And I wanted to start with kind of what alternative ways to think about this, and I just put in a couple of. You don't need to read all of this on the screen. I'll explain, but at Truesec, where I work, we say basically we aim at preventing breach and minimizing impact. Essentially, prevent bad things from happening, and when it happens, make it as least painful as possible. Kaspersky, they say it's the practice of defending things and networks from malicious attacks. And NIST says that, yeah, it's prevention of damaging things and restoring things and protecting your information, and then you have the CIA triad: available or confidentiality, integrity, availability, but also authentication, non-repudiation. So from these alone, I believe you can see kind of what I'm getting at, right? They are quite similar, but they're still quite different as well. So before the session, we had one question regarding working in cybersecurity. So I want to take a short mention about that, to mention how I did it, and also how many of people I know and worked around did it, and the communications I usually have when I talk and do things together with universities, but also people that switch from working in one field for many, many years and wanting to switch into security. So very briefly here, what I usually recommend people is that if you want to work in security, instead of going to universities and lectures online, go to work ads. Go to work ads, grab as many as you can, list all the things that they say these are requirements for these particular roles, and list all the things that they say these are the things you will work with. Put them all in a big sheet or whatever you have together and map up. These are the core skills that you need to work in cybersecurity, and these are the core types of tasks you will be doing. And once you do this, you will notice that there's a big difference and there's a lot of variety. And that is simply because security is, generally speaking, a supporting function to everything else. You have coders, and then you have people that does the security for the coding, or secure coders. Then you have function testers and unit testers that test the functionality of a system. And then you have security testers that does the security part of that testing, right? And so forth. So anything from highly, highly technical to no technical at all. And it's hard to, because everyone has a different view of what cybersecurity is, you will see all kinds of variations of requests, demands, and asks for skill sets. And that's my way of recommending to navigate that. Try to understand, do you want to go the technical route and non-technical route? And if you're starting out in security, looking at a security operations center, which is generally an entry-level job if you are new into security or want to switch into security, that's a great place to start if you want to work with technical things. So a SOC, a monitoring type of business. And if you want to work more into the InfoSec, the more less technical, then I usually say try to look for the big consultancy firms to start getting some kind of baseline cybersecurity skill set to work from. That was just a bit briefly about that. I know many of you guys that are listening here have all kinds of different roles and all kinds of different fields, so I don't want to get stuck on this too long. We're going to get into this, and then we'll talk a little bit about what you can do or what you can think about for yourself or your colleagues or your friends or your family. And then the rest of the session is going to be focused more so on the bigger picture, the organizational perspective, protecting our organization, what is the bad guys doing out there, how does the ecosystem work, and so forth. But I wanted to take a small section to think about or to talk about what you can do for yourself, which applies to your daily life, but also to your work life. So it applies to all of you. And naturally, I can't cover everything. So I'm going to switch to a slide now, and you will see a list of a very few couple of things. And you will probably immediately ask, what about this? What about that? What about this? And I will say, yeah, it's relevant too. Yeah, it's relevant too. And all of a sudden, we have a list of 100 things you should do, and no one has any idea what you should focus on, because you can't do all 100 things at once. And if you can do all of those 100 things, then good, then you're in a good state. Very few people can. Even those that work in security have top-notch security in everything they do. It's almost non-existent, I would say. So a couple of things. Some might seem simple, but I will just mention briefly why. Antivirus. So there's tons of products out there and more coming all the time about antivirus. The way that I usually think about it is that I want an antivirus to have two things. I want it to understand the system I am working on really well. So if I'm a Windows person, I want the antivirus to know Windows really, really well. Linux and Mac is a bit special cases because historically they haven't really had any antivirus, and a lot of times they still don't. So it's a bit of a special case, but that's one of my criteria. Know the operating system really well, because an antivirus needs to know what is normal and good, right? The second thing is have access to a large amount of understanding and knowledge, and very updated knowledge on what is bad, what is known bad. These are like the two criteria that I find. So for me as a Windows person, there is basically a free option, and I'm not an advocate for any particular product. I'm not selling or promoting any product, but for me, there is one product that meets those criteria and is free, and therefore it's hard to compete with, and that's simply the built-in Windows Defender. And that is, from our investigation experiences, also the one antivirus that generally has the best effect on an organizational level as well, purely based on the incidents we do. Other antivirus solutions have sometimes extra features, extra good stuff that can help in certain situations. Very rarely it truly protects you. It can protect against some simple things, but not the real things that happens out there. And the reason why, they know the platform. They developed Windows, so they know Windows quite well. And two, even if you install another antivirus solution on your device, Windows Defender will lay there in the background anyway and passively see and listen on things and send that to the Microsoft Cloud. So essentially, they have access to nearly every single Windows device, out there in the entire world, regardless if you have other antivirus solutions or not. So it collects the largest amount possible of known bad things from all across the world, from as many devices as possible, makes it extremely hard to compete with. And that's just my view on antivirus. Briefly, update patching and restart. As simple as it comes, but every other incident that we work on, this is still an issue, and it's related to, a lot of people have automated patching and updates and so forth, but never restart their computer. The way generally these type of updates and patching works is that unless you restart your computer, it doesn't actually work. It has been installed, but it's not in effect until you restart. And there are exceptions to this, and it's not as black and white, but generally speaking, it needs restarts, and that applies to also servers if you're someone who's managing servers. So keep that in mind, because we quite often see that, yeah, patching has been done and it all looks nice, but it hasn't been restarted for 2 years, so it's been vulnerable, and the threat actor utilized this to break into your systems. Is also good for protecting your own devices. If you accidentally or for some reason click on something bad, then you have better protection in place. Password management, as relevant for you as for your business. Reusing password, having the same password on admin accounts as normal accounts, storing them in text files, and so forth. It's one of the most common things. Essentially, it's so easy for the threat actors, generally speaking, to move around and get access to your accounts in your environment, because very, very few people handle this in a good way. And there's tons of good solutions out there, generally speaking, password managers. It's very simple to use, and especially on a personal level. On an organizational level, it can be a bit trickier, but it is still today one of the biggest things that cause a threat actor from having no access to controlling everything in a matter of minutes sometimes, because of handling passwords in a bad way. And I'm seeing a comment in the chat here that restart is required for Windows only, and yes, that's true. Linux and Mac or Unix systems in general is a little bit is a bit different in that sense. So yes, that is absolutely, because it has had different requirements for it over the years, right? So it makes sense that it's been designed in different ways, even if Linux is also now moving more and more towards being more similar to Windows in terms of user experience, even if it hasn't historically been that in the same way. And a little bit about the core things to think about for yourself, for protecting your devices or your family's devices or your friends' devices these are some of the core things to keep an eye on, to know that these are the main threats. The likelihood that someone is going to connect to your Wi-Fi and hack your devices that way is extremely unlikely, because it poses a much, much higher risk to the bad guys or to the one who wants you bad. Then we're talking more someone who's really after you specifically, and that is very uncommon. USB sticks, it exists, it's out there, also very uncommon. These are the three core things to keep an eye out for, that has by far the most chance of impacting you. Malware, say we had a case, for example, not long ago where someone was going to go to hotmail.com, the old school emailing solution, and they misspelled Hotmail. They landed on a bad site that had some bad stuff on it, and instead of logging in, they accidentally executed some bad things. Can happen very easily, and it's one of the more prevalent things that can happen to your private device. Harvesting, what I mean with that is that your email account or your passwords or your personal information has a direct market value. A legitimate email address that belongs to a person can be sold straight up as is, nothing extra. Just the email address can be sold for money on the dark web. So just knowing that you have an email address and this belongs to a person, that is value in itself. So what the bad guys usually do, or often do, is that they spam all over the place, and you've probably seen this, right? But they also actually compromise organizations. One email account, for example, then they take that person's Outlook mailbox and they send a new email to every single one in their mailbox and says, here, have a look at this file. And then people log in and they are redirected to some bogus site. And the only purpose of that is to collect people's email addresses and passwords if they can, because that on its own has value. So that's a continuous thing that we see all the time, that this is continuous harvesting, trying to collect as many accounts, email addresses, and so forth, and passwords as possible all the time to either sell directly or use in subsequent attacks. And then one of the prevalent things that you as an individual will come across and you might have seen, and I will switch to a little picture example to give you an idea of what I'm mentioning. Here's one example that is a little bit suspicious. Someone out of the blue sends you some happy holidays message and yeah, thank you, and they are saying we are doing some donations for children in need. It all looks very nice and good, right? They mention a real foundation, the Wish Foundation, and then they say, just send me money via PayPal. I'll gather the donations and send in one check. If this comes from your friend, a trusted person that you know on a Facebook Messenger or some other platform, LinkedIn maybe, then ideally you would say what this person said. Well, I think I'll send it directly to them instead. But this is a very common method, a common scam that we see a lot, especially on Facebook and in Sweden. It's been a lot of revolving around Swish, where people get their Facebook accounts compromised and they send message to their friends saying, hey, I'm a little bit short on money this month. Could you please borrow me 500 kroners or Swedish kroners or 1,000 Swedish kroners? Switch it to this number, please. Very common scam that's happening in Sweden. And if you do this on a large scale, compromise 500 Facebook accounts over the span of a month, and you send to all their friends, say 100, 2, 3, 4, or more hundreds average. If you get as many as 10 people sending, you might have 10,000 Swedish kronor for 1 hour of work and an automatic scam sending out. So it's a lucrative business. That's why they do it. I think these examples is a poor picture. These ones you have probably also seen. Weird, surprising, random messages sending out, and usually these will say that to claim your prize, please put in this information, because it's more common when you send things to a personal device, a mobile phone, that people want to steal things from you, not compromise your mobile phone, because that's a bit trickier business, and there's a lot of things to stop that. So generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking, these type of weird scams that you might receive and see are scam related. They want to steal your credit card details or your login details, generally speaking. Another couple of fun examples that Daily Mail provided. the left side, the first on the left side is some agent apparently that asks for a discussion and a meeting, and then goes, "What's your name?" As a very professional agent. This is the kind of the security thinking mindset that you should find yourself in. Does it sound weird? Does it sound too good to be true? Probably it's not true, and it's a good idea to be a bit skeptical, right? The second one in the middle, that's even more suspicious, right? Very cracky, bad English, and The Rock, famous actor, supposedly is gonna send you $1,000, and you need to provide your debit card. That's weird in so many ways. And the final thing, trust me, I'm just using a second account. I think most of you guys, you have opted to listen to this session. I don't think you would fall for this, but people do. They definitely do. And worse, I can tell you, there are people fall for worse stuff. The third one, also kind of weird, out of the blue, get something about your finances and help and so forth, and the answer is, yeah, let's meet in the year 2099, and the answer is yeah, just great, perfect, thank you. Remember what I said, right? These are widespread. They just target as many as they can, and they only need a tiny percentage to approve a click or agree, and that's it. They don't need everyone, because they won't go to one person only and send these kind of things. They will do it to as many as they can, and not bother with even trying that hard a lot of the times. So to summarize a little bit, to protect yourself before we go into protecting your company, updating, restarting your devices, like we saw in the chat, right? Linux and Mac also, that matter, a bit different, but generally speaking, it's still a good practice to do, especially at least for anything Windows, and there are other OS versions out there as well that benefits from this. Some firmware upgrades, for example, on appliances might need a restart, otherwise it doesn't take effect, and so forth. Links and websites and all of that, I think you've heard probably 1,000 times if you have read news and articles and seen other presentations. Always be careful with that. Know what you're clicking on. Password reuse. If you use your password on Facebook and that account gets compromised, and you have the same password and same email address on LinkedIn, then you need to assume that this password you can never use again on any place ever. So you need to change that, because that password is going to go into a list of known passwords, and it will be reused over and over and over for many other places, for many other attacks. So in the same way, if your company or the company you work at gets hacked, and it is a severe attack, and someone says you have to change password, a general good way of thinking is that, okay, someone might know your work password. That means if you use that password also on anything private, like Facebook or your email or so, that needs to change as well. Because like I said, passwords, account names, email addresses, all of this is very, very good things to have for a bad guy, and it has a lot of monetary value. The antivirus thing, it's as simple and as old as it can be, but sometimes there's still attacks that simply because they missed an antivirus, the server got hacked, and eventually the entire business got hacked. Also this includes people's private devices, where people have disabled antivirus and shut them off because they like to download things that they maybe shouldn't download, and whoops, they got something really bad. Handling your passwords, I mentioned that, right? And now the scammers that we just talked about before, that this is a big lucrative business targeting individual users more so than businesses. So therefore it's something to be wary of. So I saw we got a question in the chat if we can rely on Windows Bitdefender alone when it comes to a company setup. I'll put it like this. If you talk about Windows Defender, the built-in antivirus, then that in terms of antivirus, that's generally what I would recommend and what we usually recommend for business setups as well. Now, it doesn't work for older operating systems, Windows, and in today's world, which we'll get into soon when we talk about this, you also need an additional level of protection, because an antivirus will only take you so far. So it's not like an antivirus will protect you against everything. You need something else that's also called EDR, or detection capabilities, essentially, We'll get into that soon. But yes, when we build data centers and when we restore companies from being encrypted, generally speaking, we remove other antivirus products and use the built-in defender because it's hard to compete with at this point in time. If you're to compete with it, you need to do so, generally speaking, in my view and what I've seen, on other things than antivirus capabilities. So for example, another type of antivirus can have, it is an antivirus, but it's also this other thing, this extra thing, and that extra thing might be what is good enough for you to go in that direction. But if you use it only for antivirus purposes, there's not really much need to pay for other solutions when you have such a good, strong one built in. Take that money, put it on something else that has more value for you. That's our view on it. So security, I see we got a question, and I'll get back to that in a little bit. But to go into security for your company, I wanted to move to this slide. And here is the same thought as I mentioned before. When you see this list, you will probably say, oh, he doesn't say this, he doesn't mention this. And we get in the same situation. We have 100+ things that we need to consider, and 100% true. These are some of the core things based on incidents that I've been part of, or that my colleagues has been part of, that when they have been in place have tremendously affected how badly an organization has been hurt, or if they have been hurt at all. So you see, for example, here is missing patching and updating, right? And that is definitely important. But to a large extent, these other things that I mentioned will actually have better effect. But of course, you still need to patch, and there's so much more complexity to it. But if you're going to focus on anything, if you have these things in place, then you are way better off than most are, and it will deter a large amount of attacks and threat actors. The first thing, multi-factor authentication, MFA. The threat actors, I'm going to show you a slide on some statistics for the last 2 years soon, but a large amount of attacks these days are targeting internet exposed systems. So things like Citrix or VDI solutions or VPNs or some type of login solution that you can reach through the internet, which is quite normal these days with the whole work from home situation and all the corona that happened and everything like that, right? Organizations that has MFA are, generally speaking, much less likely to actually be affected, because there's just so many out there that don't have MFA. So it's easier for a threat actor to target someone that doesn't have MFA versus those that has MFA. So that alone is a pretty good deterrent for stopping attackers from even trying. Some of them have gotten pretty good at bypassing different types of MFAs, but it's a cheap thing, generally speaking, because there's a lot of reasonable good options out there without super high investment costs for most organizations to do a significant improvement to your security. It's also a big part if you're looking at insurance business and cyber insurance and so forth, where a lot of insurances these days say that if you do not have MFA of anything internet exposed, you won't even get an insurance. Or if it turns out that you have an insurance and attackers got in because you didn't have MFA, they might say, sorry, you didn't live up to your end of the bargain, so you will get zero insurance money. So if you are in that business, I would suggest have a look at this, because it's not fun getting the bill and realizing that, oh, the insurance will cover nothing because you have forgot something. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. The second part is a bit more complex to understand, and I'm going to keep it brief, but when the threat actors get into your environment, I'm going to show you this attack chain to show you how the attack works. But when an attacker gets into your environment, into your servers or clients or whatever it is, generally speaking, their end goal, it might be ransomware, it might be stealing data, it might be something else. But to reach that end goal, generally, they need to have the right access and the right permissions to get there. Because they might land somewhere here. This is their starting point, and they want to get here somewhere, right? So how do they get here? And how do they even identify that this is where they want to get to? to do that, generally speaking, they want to gain higher privileges. They want to get admin access. They want to get more accounts that have access to different things. They want to move around in your network and so forth. And what happens in nearly all attacks is that if you have a domain or some type of identity-based structure in your server environment, they will look at obtaining the highest levels of privileges possible, domain admin, if we talk traditional Active Directory domains. And that is, generally speaking, super easy if you do not have what's here, administrative tiering. If you allow the highest possible admin to log on to everything, which is standard, then it's super easy, generally speaking, for a bad guy to also steal those credentials, and then they can also log in everywhere they want. So what you want to do is to say that if you have domain admin or the highest levels of admin, you are only allowed, technically, it's not a policy, but a technical limitation. You cannot log in to other systems and devices except a very, very small number of systems that are in the highest tier. So basically what that means is that if any of those systems in the highest tiers are compromised, that means all your systems in that tier is compromised. Then you have things like server admins, a layer below, client admins, and you can add layer on layer on layer. And you can even say, this business area, you need this particular admin account, and only that type of admin account can access those servers. I've seen examples of some admins having 7 different accounts, for example, to handle different levels of their environment. Because what you don't want is that if someone compromises, say, unpatched old system that is exposed to the internet that holds really old stuff, that server is not interesting or relevant, maybe, for you, but an admin with the highest possible privilege logs onto that. The threat actor can steal those credentials, and then they can immediately log on to everything that's the most sensitive to you. That's the jump you want to make hard for them. Unfortunately, we live in the kind of world where it's nearly impossible to fully protect yourself. So therefore, we have the button or item number 3 here on the list. You need to have detect and respond capabilities. You need to have the ability to see bad things going on and take action on it. I'm going to get back to that soon. And even if you have that, in a lot of cases, you want to get back to being operational, to be functional, to recover in some way. So having backups, and a key thing here, a lot of organizations do backups. They take backups, but they might have a good backup solution, but they have a really bad recovery solution. What I mean with that is that the backup might be incomplete. The backup might only cover some things. And in the event that you need to restore every single system from a backup, the environment just can't handle it, and it takes weeks. It's really good at backing up stuff, and it backs up everything, but you can't restore everything at once because the system is never built to handle that. Super, super common, and it's very often an overlooked perspective of cyber attacks and the cyber kind of things. And then additionally, something that will go a long way is the concepts of security culture that your employees, your colleagues, your friends have in mind, that this is a little bit of a Wild West where anyone can be attacked at any point in time for any reason. You don't have to be special to be targeted. You can just be caught in a wide net and randomly, oh, you make money, we will hack you. Or we've seen dentists get hacked that has one computer that lost everything because they just happened to get caught in the wide net of things, the widespread attacks, and it was fast and easy. So they just encrypted everything and gave them a note that said, hey, send some money. And then they didn't care. For this dentist, it meant a lot. That was the life work being lost. So that's a mindset to get into, so that when you see something weird, something suspicious, ideally someone should react to it. Because a lot of the time when we do incidents and it's gone really, really bad, for example, ransomware, someone will say like, oh yeah, but I saw that a week ago, but I didn't think it was anything special. And in hindsight, that doesn't feel so good. So fostering a culture of a security mindset where people are reacting to things that are a bit weird, suspicious, is generally a very good thing. some numbers. This is from our threat intelligence reports. We produce them on a yearly basis at Truesec based on all the incidents and work that we do. This shows ransom-based attacks, access harvesting, so you're just stealing passwords and credentials and email addresses, resource hijacking, that's crypto mining and those kind of things, BEC, that's business email compromise. That is when you compromise just an email address to either send more emails from that address or try to manipulate emails and banking data and so forth in email conversations. Data theft, that is where we've just evidence of people stealing things, as things like corporate espionage and nation state attacks and so forth. And another is all kinds of other things which are a bit unknown or undefined. And I'm going to read a question while I grab a sip of water. I hear someone has unmuted their mic. I cannot see, but I know it's went quiet, so thank you. The question in the chat was, as a security professional, do you not often run into problems with Windows Defender blocking potentially unwanted software, which you do actually want, like hacking tools? I don't, for the reason that the way we work, at least, is that our devices that access any type of corporate data never has any kind of tool like that on them. We use virtual machines. So the way that we do it, for example, is that if I'm working on an incident, a new incident comes in, and I need access to all of these special tools that are kind of weird, a little bit hacky, not the nicest tools, but still trustworthy by the forensic community, I will create a dedicated virtual machine that has no access to any corporate data at all for my sensitive things, and I will use that purely for the perspective of analyzing and working with forensic things. In the same way, if I need to browse the dark web, I have a dedicated virtual machine that is set up to protect very heavily, that has it doesn't have a disk at all. So nothing, even if I download malware on it, it doesn't matter, because the moment I restart it, everything is gone because it starts from an image. And then I have a malware analysis machine that's disconnected from all kinds of networks. It doesn't have any network card or at all. So that one also doesn't matter. I could live encrypt that machine for you right now, and it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't affect anything. So that is generally how we recommend you work with things. So you keep your work computer, your private or your private device, you keep that clean, and that should never have anything bad on it. Generally, as I'm not even admin on my own device, if I put it like that. I use a normal user that's not even admin on my own device, and I need admin permissions every single day, but to perform specific tasks, and then I do them in virtual machines. So that is generally how we recommend to do things. What I want to highlight with this is that you see that 2021, 2022 is quite similar. It's quite the same. But the next slide is the more interesting one, I would say here, which is how the attacks happened, or what were the attack vectors? How did the bad guys get access? And you see the numbers are quite similar on both sides, right? External device in this, for example, in this case, well, let me shortly describe what these are. Phishing, sending emails and so forth, right? Remote service, that are things like someone logging in through a VPN or a Citrix solution, just straight up logging in. Vulnerability, that is somehow using some kind of vulnerability or weakness in some type of internet exposed system to get into your environment. So for example, a VPN vulnerability that allows them to get access to your VPN or a website. External device, that's USB sticks. We've had a rise in that in 2022 because there were some campaigns going on, and they have continued into 2023 as well. Trusted service, that is things like supply chain attacks and coding libraries having malicious code injected to them that then affects others. And then there's the other category, which is different. But I want to highlight here is that if you add phishing, remote service, and vulnerability together, you get roughly 90%, a bit less, but roughly 90% of all attacks. Again, this is based on our data, 300 or more, so severe incidents. roughly half of them being ransomware. These are the vectors that are the most prevalent. Why do I say that? Because if you are looking to understand what security products, tooling, and methods to do to protect yourself or your business, you need to know what are the attacks that the threat actors do. What are the methods they use to attack you, right? You need to know the threats to protect yourself against those threats. If you try to protect yourself against something someone has written in an article and you have no idea, and it turns out, well, you now invested 1 million euro in protecting yourself against the 1% things, but you have not invested anything in the 90% thing. So that's why these things matter. And you need to then adapt it to your business. I might say that it's uncommon, but let's say you don't have an email solution because that's not relevant to you for whatever reason. Let's pretend that's the case, right? Well, then you don't perhaps need to think about that percentage, then look at the other percentage of things and see that, okay, then this is the most likely thing that could affect you. Or maybe you don't have any type of internal service at all. You only have consultants that have their own clients, and maybe you have some SaaS solution that you log into, but that's it. Then think, okay, the phishing is the more prevalent thing perhaps for you. And then you know that that's the area to invest in, right? That's how to think about this. And this slide leads us into, I will show you and walk through like an example. And I'm just keeping an eye on the time here because we're gonna have to have some time for some questions, even if we've taken some along the way. But I'm gonna go into sort of the last couple of slides here to give you a line of what happens. This just shows when you first get breached, when someone first gets into your environment, till they actually start doing something, it doesn't have to be immediate. 2021, it was more compromise one system and start working on it, versus 2022 that has changed, as you can see, that you compromise an environment and then you wait until you do something. Why? Well, what we have seen from leaks from the bad guys is that they compromise tons of organizations all the time. And then they understand, okay, what type of organization is this? They rank them and list them according to the revenue they make. So then you have, say 20 companies that have all been hacked. And then you see that this company has the most revenue. So if we hack them more, they are more likely to give us more amount of money. And then it's basically work down the list. It also is a good way to see that if you hack something or get into something and you haven't been detected for a week, even if you haven't done much, well, chances are that you could carry out the rest of your attack without being detected as well. Now, to get into the last couple of slides, I wanted to give you kind of the flow of an attack and how you think to it. And that's going to be the last thing I'll cover before we go into some questions. So normal state, we're before an attack, nothing is going on, things are working, things are fine. And for whatever reason, you have your first compromise. Someone compromises your network or your systems or your system, if that is. Then there's an inactive period, like you just mentioned, anything from a minute until weeks before they do things, right? And then they start doing their activities, and then they escalate, they start mapping the environment, and in most cases, somewhere between 2 to 48 hours is what it normally takes to fully take over the entire environment. Sometimes even faster. It's usually not that hard to do because there's just so many ways to do it, and it's really, really hard to protect yourself against everything. So then we reach, after those 2 to 48 hours, we reach the full compromise. So they have full permissions and full access to what they need. Now they need to do the final part of the attack to reach their objectives: steal data, encrypt the environment, delete backups, whatever their objective is. So that's, again, anywhere from hours, days, or weeks, depending on the goal and the complexity and size of an environment. And there, usually at some point, the breach is detected, and then you have to respond to it and take action. And that can also take anything from hours to weeks, depending on the severity of things. We have on the left side, the green line here, predictive and preventive capabilities. These are the type of capabilities that you can have to make this harder. So you can predict kind of what type of threats are common for you. Yeah, phishing might be prevalent for you because you rely a lot on email, but you don't have any servers exposed to the internet. Or maybe your VPN is very vulnerable, so that's a high risk for you. And then preventive things like, do you have antivirus? Do you have very good patching, administrative tiering, and so forth, MFA? and then detect and respond capabilities. If someone is in your environment and does bad things, do you have any way of seeing that? Do you have some type of tooling that will alert you on bad things? Do you have 24/7 monitoring so that when you go home Friday evening, there's not free reign the entire weekend for someone to do bad things to your environment because no one will be looking, but you actually have someone looking at your environment? And if we now try this out, what we want to do here, we want to increase the time before compromise. We want to make it harder for them to compromise you, and we want to make it harder for them to achieve their objectives. So it should take a longer time for them. We want not 2 hours, 48 hours, or even longer. And we want to make it hard for them so that their normal methods, the simple, easy things, are not something that they can do. We want to think of it like this. If a burglar is going to break into your house, if you have a normal door and you haven't even locked the door, they will open it, go in, take what they want and leave. Barely leaves a trace. Very fast, very easy to do. If you have a normal door but it's locked, well, then they need to break open the door. That's going to leave some traces. It might be loud because they might make noise. It will take more time for sure. Now imagine if you also have a security door. Then we're on a whole other level. Now we need to do a lot more. Maybe you had then forgot to lock the window and then the window is wide open and they go in there instead. You get the point, right? That the harder you make it for them, the louder they have to be and the more time it takes for them to do something. And that gives you more possibility to detect them. And here's where the better capability you have at detecting a breach, the more likely you are to actually be able to respond to things in a right way. If you rely on only the antivirus sending you emails, that's not really a suitable solution in today's world. If you have an EDR solution or an NDR, so endpoint detect and respond, or network detect and respond, that continuously looks and monitors everything that happens, you have a SOC monitoring center that looks at everything 24/7, you could potentially see the first traces of anything bad within a minute and immediately say isolate that device and stop it before anything happens. So this is the mindset, the thinking. So essentially what we're going to do is this. The time before an attack, it should be much, much harder for it to actually happen because you have good protections from the outside. You have MFA everywhere and so forth. And if they get in, it's very, very hard for them to get in or move around, I mean. So you also have the detection capabilities and respond capabilities so that in the event, which will happen, someone clicks on something bad from an email, for example. You see it immediately, you isolate that client, you bring it back and say, we will reinstall it, and we can see in our security tooling that it hasn't spread anywhere. Nice. Nice. Now you don't have to reinstall 500 clients, just one, because you had capabilities to act on it fast and you saw it immediately. Which also means that this slide, like I said, you can recover from backups and so forth much faster, much easier. I did have a couple more slides that I added in if we needed to discuss more and have some time, but you have provided some questions and so on. So I think we will kind of leave it at there. And I'm just going to jump a couple of slides to the final one, which just states like this, questions. And I will start with, there was one question we had beforehand, which was how prepared is Sweden for attack on the power grid? And I will put it like this: I am no expert on the insides of the defensive measures of our power grid and or how we protect that. And if I were, I would most likely be on the security clearance, so I wouldn't be able to talk about it. But generally speaking, what we have seen around the world is that if a serious actor has the intent and wish to really go after something, generally speaking, there's always ways to do it. Anything from threatening people's families to USB devices to attacking from the internet. And we've seen that if we look through the news of history, that if someone wants something bad enough, generally speaking, it is doable. It's just a matter of resources and time. And Sweden, generally speaking, is not at the very top of security. We're very high up on digitalization and IT, but security, we're not the best when you look at Sweden as a country. We're running at the end of the closing of the session, so I will stop sharing my screen now and see what thoughts, or if you might have some questions. And if we run over, I have the possibility to run over, but Maria will have to jump in and decide if we have a hard stop, or if you find it okay to continue a couple of minutes if we end up in questions. And I saw one come in right there. So, is there a relation between remote service exploits and vulnerabilities? Can you do remote exploits without vulnerabilities? It's a matter of definition, because depending on who you ask and depending on how you think, someone using stolen credentials to log into your remoting solution, some people consider vulnerability, because you had a vulnerability in terms of a credential leakage. So it's a matter of definition, and in a lot of cases, when someone has used an actual exploit that is just not logged and stored in any way at all, so it's nearly impossible to know for sure that someone has actually exploited things. So that's why it's a bit of a gray zone area, unfortunately. And then we have from Dan, I believe, if I receive a threat email from, for example, that my company has been hacked, how should I first respond? Generally speaking, what we recommend is to disconnect anything from the network. So not shut them down, because you shut them down, they might never start again if they are, depending on how they are affected. You want to stop further damage from happening. And how you do that is by disconnecting from the network so nothing can spread and the bad guys can't talk back to your device if they have some type of remote access. So network isolation, pull the network cables. That is generally the approach. And then contact some sort of IT incident response team specialist to get help and insights, because then you are in the situation of you need to understand what has happened. You need to get rid of all the bad traces. You might need to do some reporting to some legal entities and so forth. Police, you need to send some reports to the police, or should at least. So that is the first response should be to disconnect network, pull network cables if you have, or disconnect network cards if that's your option. Looking at the question about EDR vendors, and CrowdStrike and SentinelOne, they're early in detecting it, and then also a second question. I'll start with the first one. I would put it like this: most EDR solutions are quite good today, and it's more a matter of what works and what suits you. We usually say if you are an organization that uses everything Microsoft, so Azure, Office 365, traditional Windows domain and so forth, then you can combine everything together. So then it makes a lot of sense to use, for example, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, their EDR solution. But if you are an organization that has a lot of Linux, for example, or 50-50, then Microsoft solution is not that great for Linux, not yet at least. So then things like SentinelOne, CrowdStrike are definitely very solid options. So I would say it has to be adjusted and tailored a little bit to your organization and what you have in it. A lot of people we see, they pay for licenses in Microsoft, so they actually even have the EDR, but they have it, but they don't use it. So that's also something to look into, that you might already have the EDR solution, just not use it because you already have the licenses required. The supply chain attack question is, and I see now from Maria that those who wish to stay for some QA can do, but officially the session is ended and there will be a recording afterwards. So just want to say thanks for listening. I hope it was interesting and valuable. And give you some thoughts or some insights or some feelings at least. To answer the question about supply chain attacks, I would say it's a very tricky one, and in some cases it's near impossible because it's a little bit out of your hands. So it even comes down to agreements and SLAs and so forth. In one way or another, say for example, you have a developer who accidentally downloads some bad code, and that bad code is executed on that developer's device because it was a package, or it was something that got compromised, some malicious code got injected. That malicious code will still at some point execute on your systems and your devices. And if at that point, then you can detect it. Because that's, for example, an antivirus might not detect it because they think like, oh, this is a legitimate package that I've seen many, many times. It's a little bit different, but it's not bad. Versus a detection type tooling will see that, oh, this package, it will see, for example, the code now calls home to a weird IP address. This is behavior that we haven't seen before. This is really weird. It will tell you, hey, this is some weird stuff going on here. You should probably look if this is legit or not. And then you can look at it, investigate, and see. So that's one way to detect it. So prevent and protect yourself from it actually happening is, generally speaking, very hard, because it can happen in such weird and unprecedented ways that it's really, really hard. So therefore, that's something that is, generally speaking, something that is detective kind of action, something to detect when it happens and then quickly react on it. Any other questions? If any other thoughts, or we did get another question. In regards to security awareness in your employees, how often should you teach your employees about antivirus, phishing, etc.? Is there a general consensus? I would say that depending on who you ask, you will get completely different answers. So in my opinion, there is no general consensus. I think, generally speaking, if you adhere to some type of framework, some type of regulations or directives that you are under for your business, that's a good baseline to start from. So there might be some regulation that you are under that says you have to do it once per year or twice per year or whatever it might be. If you are not under that, I would say it is a matter of those responsible in your organization's understanding of the overall security culture. When you go on lunch breaks, do people actually talk about these things? Do you have a history of bad things happening and people are acting to that in a good way? Then you are probably not going to need training as much. Maybe you have training as part of an onboarding process for any new employees. So then is also another thing that might not need it as much. But generally speaking, it's something that you can easily forget in the moment. So having shorter sessions or talking about it to show everyone that this is important, this is relevant, this is part of our business, and this can bankrupt us if it goes wrong. Then it's something that definitely can be brought up commonly or regularly. And for us as a security company, we when we have internal summits and meetings, we continuously remind each other and also centrally from management to always remember about these things, keep these things in mind. But it doesn't have to be 1 hour session every month, because we at least don't have the need for that, because we don't have a history of having issues with it, and we have a very open culture where everyone immediately says if they feel like something fishy or something weird might have happened. We immediately say and talk to that to our colleagues, because we have no, at least I will, for my sake, there's no shame. I don't feel any shame whatsoever telling my colleagues that, oh, I might have clicked on something bad, because I know they will 100% support me and do everything they can to help me, because that's the kind of culture we have fostered. So for that reason, we are not in need of constant training all the time, because we have that type of culture, security culture. So that's I hope that answers the questions. It's not a clear answer, do it every month or so, because I don't think that is the answer. I think the answer is it depends on your security culture. That's my opinion. Any further questions? So we're quite a couple of minutes over, but there's still a decent amount of people staying, but most have dropped off, I believe. So I feel like this is possibly a good time to close down the session. Thank you all for listening.